Welcome to the Leading Movement Health Series. I'm your host, Phil Wagner, founder and CEO of Sparta Science. So today's guest, I'm super excited about. Keith Duggar. I actually had to just do a second take because he's known as Doogie. And Doogie is the head athletic trainer for the Colorado Rockies, which is a professional baseball team. And he's been the MLB for 24 seasons, including trainer of the year and training staff of the year, which is probably something you'll hear from he's actually more proud about, because his staff includes 7 minor league teams across the U.S. and the Dominican, and he's even had some Venezuela travel and world access to all different types of folks. And why this episode is unique is that leadership is such a multi-tool pursuit, and baseball, of all the sports, might have the largest breadth. He works with Dominican Republic players that are sending home money for their families to Ivy League grads that are coming into the minor league system. These are anywhere from multimillionaires to minor leaguers making 50, 60K a year. And so what amazes me most about Keith Doogie is this range of management and communication that he's been able to master. I remember one time he urged me to come join him in the Dominican Republic, and really learned from him and some of the things he did ultimately around meeting people where they are and really listening to the people that you're leading. And so I want to welcome Keith to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks, Phil. Honored to be here.
And so, Doogie, like when you think about health, we talk about organizations. One of the things that always people think about, at least with baseball, why it's so important is the volume of games. There's no comparison. Any other sport, people are like, oh, there's 160 games. Most people don't even think about spring training, right? Which is another chunk added onto that. So, talk a little bit about why you see health so important in your organization.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. So you said 162 games, but if you throw in spring training for almost 2 months, you're looking at, 75% of the year. Basically, we're with these guys. So it's not just the health care during the season, which is the easy part for us, is kind of helping them out during the off seasons. And, one of the things that's kind of unique in baseball is we're almost like a healthcare network for their entire families. Young kids are getting married. They've never had to set up appointments for their wives, or they're having their first child, just kind of getting them organized, kind of more life skills first. Right. And then we can take care of the easy part, the bumps and bruises and the injuries during the game, and kind of the prehab, as we call it. But I think that's what makes it exciting for us, and these kids end up being part of our families. And that, I think we use our network as kind of a family atmosphere. I think that's unique in our sport of baseball, not just in my organization, but in all organizations.
Yeah, that's something I actually have never spoken to you about, but makes total sense when you're with teams, for 10 months of the year. And a lot of them are at that age when they're expanding their support system, getting married, having kids, right? They're ultimately going to come to people they trust to help navigate that. And that support system is huge, right?
Yeah.
For their own well-being, right? Because I know we've chatted about, hey, we got to be careful of this guy because he just had a kid, so he's probably not sleeping so much, right? So
yeah, they're normal people. They have normal daily issues they're dealing with, just like you and I. When the kid has had their first child and they're not used to sleeping, right? And they're spot sleeping and is trying to be a professional athlete, it's tough on these guys. So we have to teach them these certain little life skills here first, and then, how to take care of themselves and be a professional athlete
at the same time. Right. Yeah. They just took on a new job, dad or husband, right?
Yep.
So, you've been in the game for, over 2 decades now. And obviously it's changed a lot, the game itself, but also health, right? And technology has been, rapidly advancing, and so I think one of the things that's been most impressive to me is how you've been able to triage and filter, right, all the incoming. So you kind of keep what works, but, assess what could be new, try it, and potentially adopt it. How do you kind of overcome or manage all that income and traffic?
That's a great question. So I kind of call our position in the organization is gatekeepers, right? So we do filter in a lot of the new technology. And this isn't just by me. I have 3 great assistants. I have 6 or 7 minor league athletic trainers. And then we have a whole group of strength coaches. one thing I encourage is all of them to look outside the box, right? Look what different countries are doing, different sports, kind of filter in how we can adapt some of this new technology and understand that, our profession, it's a science, it's an evolution, it's changing all the time. If we become stagnant in our position, then I think our treatment realm is going to be very stagnant. So we have to be creative, whether it's a new surgical technique that's coming out with some of our rehab protocols or new technology coming from Europe or Australia, or some of these other countries, and just kind of embrace and look into it a little bit. Don't be afraid to do your research. And there's a lot of people that are out there way smarter than me, like yourself, that, I've relied on and I trust. And sometimes they filtered out the minutia already, right? And you can kind of knock that off your checklist right away. If some of my peer group didn't believe in what they're looking into. And, now we're in the world of analytics, right? So analytics are basically just numbers from all different ways, right? We could look at analytics in our stats of our players, but there's also analytics on how we're treating our own players, right? So, time frames, how long it takes. And then for us in professional, we have to look at dollar value too, right? So if I'm going to spend, a lot of money on an expensive piece of equipment, then I'm only going to get a little bit of data from, and my history is telling me I could probably do this anyway. I'm probably going to eliminate that piece of, whatever you want to call it, modality or, new working into our environment.
Yeah, there's a certain pragmatism, right, lens that you want to put on of like, hey, let's just not adopt something, to adopt it. I was talking to a hospital administrator the other day, and they said, if we've got an 85-year-old who has a history of falls, we really don't need any technology, right, to just let us know that there's a history of falls, right, anymore. If you've got a player with, multiple hamstring injuries, there's no technology necessarily needed, right, to identify there's a risk there, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing you have to look at is the manpower, who is going to operate the new systems? Who's going to look into this? Do you need, a scientist to look into it? Do you need a strength coach? Do you need an athletic trainer? Do you need a physician? So, is it cost effective that way too, right? Because in professional sports, athletic trainers and physical therapists and strength coaches are already spread thin, right? And now if you're throwing on way too much other stuff or workloads on these guys and they're not able to handle it, now something else is kind of dwindling away, right? You're kind of losing the touch. And there's, from my travels and my work experience, there's nothing better than the human touch, the human connection, and communication, right? It doesn't matter if you're working with modalities, it doesn't matter what language it is, you better have some kind of connection with that player.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think with a lot of fears about, AI across industries and how that plays, the hope is that it actually allows more time for that human connection. But I think, you hit on a key piece there of that technology, looking at the next step of like, okay, once this is in, who would manage it? How are we going to use it relative to your manpower? Because to your point, there is a zero-sum game. If something comes in, you got to take it out. Yep. I call it the mother-in-law rule because my mother-in-law brings in, stuff into our house for our kids all the time, a big suitcase. And I always tell her, hey, whenever that suitcase comes in, it better be full on its way out. Like you better be taking stuff out. Yeah, that's your resource, right? Your people, your team.
Absolutely. That is my resource. And again, like I said, we can get kind of pinholed if we're looking just in our own little peer group within the game. So I think it's really important to look outside of just the baseball world, other sports, soccer, rugby, it doesn't matter, water polo, and cricket. I've had some connection with some, physios that work in the cricket world. And it's amazing how a lot of times there's common threads, that you could bounce ideas back and forth off of. And I think that's how you learn, right? Is you take a little piece from everyone you've been in touch with or kind of watched and see how they've been successful, right? And how they've operated. And then you try and bring that to your organization. And I don't have a magic formula by any means, but I definitely have learned from a lot of creative and individualized people that aren't afraid to kind of take a chance. And I think that's a key too, is you're going to make many mistakes, right? I told you prior to this that I think some of my best successes are my mistakes, right? That I've learned from. Yeah, that's the problem when you're a new therapist or trainer or strength coach is you're afraid of making mistakes. You want to be perfect. You and I have been doing this for a while now, and we are not perfect by any means.
No.
It'll never be perfect, even though I tell my kids I'm perfect.
Right.
But
right.
I think that some of the best physicians and orthos that I've worked with too are the ones that aren't afraid to talk about their failures of surgeries or techniques they've done too. And you want to empower your younger staff too, right? To be in that position. So you don't want to just like hover over them all the time. You know, like any young student or trainer or physician, therapist, they want to be good. They don't want to make the mistakes, and they want the pat on the back. But sometimes you got to tell them too, hey, maybe we should just do it a different way. And I think as long as you're empowering them and understanding that it's not the end of the world if they do make a mistake, I think you're going to have a good team to work with.
Yeah, and you keep referring back to that team and that connection both with the athlete, but also the network of people that are out there. And I think when just listen to all these things, I think there's so much opportunity for leaders to learn. And as I listen to you, I'm kind of coming away with, 3 kind of takeaway points that really can be applied to any industry for leadership. One is you can't forget about the support system or the actual person you're taking care of.
Yep.
And you've been doing that for decades. The Army Special Forces about 5 years ago implemented this program called POTIF, Preservation of Force and Family. And the idea is that, hey, we need to take care of the people supporting our warfighter in order, right, for that warfighter to be, more effective at their job, right? Because, there's not these siloed impacts, right? So that's one key piece. The other key piece I had is, that when you evaluate, technology, you have to think about the opportunity cost, right? It's not, everything's just not additive, right? Because you only have so much bandwidth with your people, no matter how big your organization is.
Absolutely.
And I think the third piece is, failure is a part of growth, right? And a big thing that, summarizing kind of what I'm hearing from you is not only failure, within your own leadership and your own staff, but also you can crowdsource others from other industries and their failures, right? So you can learn, right? And therefore you can start sharing, hey, I tried this, didn't work.
Yep. Absolutely. I think one of the things I implement in our organization too is we don't do, let's say, end of the year evaluations. We do weekly evaluations.
Love it.
And I want them to evaluate me too, right? So I have 3 great support staff right with me in the big leagues. But if I'm making a mistake, let's talk about it, right? Let's see if there's another way we can do it. Any incident that we have, if there's an injury on the field or a player is going to go in and have a surgery, did we handle it the right way, right? And I think that way, instead of waiting till the end of the year, you're more organized. And then the next time that happens to it, it's clockwork. You're right on top of it. It's basically your new protocol. And it's evolution too. We've watched in the football NFL last year, just a tragic incident, right? But they saved the guy's life because their protocols were in place. And I think that's a perfect example. If you've practiced every scenario, how to take care of a player, even simple things, then you're going to be better the next time you're faced with it.
Yeah, and I think you also, with the weekly, you have those shorter feedback cycles, right? There's not this lag of like, hey, this may have gone not great, but let's wait till the end of the year to kind of review it.
Yeah, and that way you don't feel like you're criticized, right? I feel like it's more of a conversation, agree to disagree type of thing.
Yeah.
I love debate, right? So, yeah, I think I'm right most of the time, but I want to talk about how it could have been different or how we could have addressed it differently. And I don't have an ego. That's one thing I'll say. The greatest leaders I've ever been around don't have ego. They might have a little flair to them, right? Because it's a confidence that they've done. But I mean, you've worked with the military. Some of the best military people I've ever been around are great communicators, and they just have this edge to them. They're confident, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to bring something to the table, I want to be confident with my idea and not just, swinging back and forth. Because if you sway in professional sports and you're communicating to your field manager and your general manager, they're throwing you out the door the next day. Right. You've got to be confident in your decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great balance that I see you emulate. That's good for all leaders, is having that balance of conviction and confidence, yet openness, right, to improve and learn, right? And how you balance those two, depending on the scenario, right, is very important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I'd say one other thing in our situation, when we're laying out a program or a protocol for a player, make them part of it, right? So I think that's real important that the player has a voice in how they're going to move forward. And it could be simple short-term goals, which is very easy, where they feel like, hey, I can do this. This is my idea. Don't just wash it away every single time. You want it your exact way. So, again, when players are coming from all over the world, they're doing things differently than what you've been taught, right? So sometimes their way is better than your way, right? Or it might be the same exact thing. It's just a different terminology or just slightly a different exercise. So you kind of, if you empower the player themselves too, they get involved in that. And then they're more apt to follow your protocol, and things move a little bit more, I guess, seamless.
Yeah. And giving that ownership, right? Giving part of that ownership of the plan to the individual trying to help, right? Ultimately, they're with themselves 24 hours a day, and that's the only constant, right?
Yeah. And I say one more thing that I've learned probably in the last 10 years, a little bit more is, guys in the off season are soliciting other opinions too, right? They're going to new PTs, they're going to other trainers, they have their own personal trainers. Make a relationship with those guys, right? If it's working, reach out to those guys. So you guys have a common idea to help these guys during this. Or, sometimes my way of communicating isn't getting through. So you can use these other individuals to kind of persuade a player or help the player, right? You work as again, like you talked about, a team effort. It just makes it so much easier. I think that helps. And I think with our coaches in professional sports too, they're just starting to grasp that idea. We've been doing a little bit longer than them, but now young athletes have their own personal coaches. That could be a hitting coach, that could be a fielding coach, it could be now the pitching lab guy, right? But make those guys part of your team too. Your total referral network, right? And that now you have everyone coming from different sides.
Yeah, and I think it all starts with, like you mentioned earlier, making sure that your ego is in check as a leader, right? And ultimately, if your goal is to truly help the player, you got to put that goal ahead of your own, I guess, hubris, if you will. Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. It's injuries are not just physical too. Like part of my referral network is the mental approach of the game too, right? Like, so your sports psychologist, your psychiatrist, if it's needed, your counselors, there's other people that have to be part of that. And instead of saying, like we did 15 years ago, stay away from them unless it's absolutely needed, I think you embrace it from the very beginning, right? And now it helps move the player along as a whole holistic approach instead of just one-sided on the physical side. We're combining the mental and physical as we're moving forward, and throw in nutrition at the same time, right? So you have the whole realm of different referral groups coming together to help the player move forward.
Yeah, I love that holistic concept. Well, Duke, I know, I caught you on your 6 days away from the team here for within 10 months. So, I appreciate the time you're able to give us and share with the audience. So thanks for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Phil. Anytime.